اعوذ بالله من الشیطان الرجیم بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم توانا بود هر که دانا بود ز دانش دل پیر برنا بود. These are the words of the Shair Firdausi, Abul Qasim Firdausi, 1,000 years ago, who said, he who has knowledge is powerful, and with knowledge, with marifat, with ilm, does the heart remain young. So thank you all for giving your time. Today we're going to talk about quite an influential person in Indian Muslim history, and most of you will have heard of him, but as it goes, perhaps many of you have not had the opportunity to look into his life and what he did. And of course, we can consider the great relevance he has for us today. So today, we're going to talk about his life and times, family history, early upbringing, education, and his, let's say, turn to mysticism. We're going to talk about the idea of the Sufi order and the idea of the Khanqah in medieval Islam. We'll talk about Nizam ud-Deen Auliya's main mission and his style of teaching. And then we'll take a break for about 5-10 minutes so you can all rest from my voice. And we'll give out some zarda, in true dargah fashion. We'll have some langar, I suppose. And hopefully there's enough for everyone. We'll just keep saying Bismillah as we pour the pot. We'll see how it goes. And then we'll read from excerpts of his discourses. I'll also explain, give some background to the discourses as well. Okay. So, Nizam ud-Deen Auliya is Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Badwani al-Bukhari, and he died in 1325. In his own lifetime, he became known as Mehboob-e-Ilahi, the beloved of God, and Nizam ud-Deen Auliya, the organizer of religion. He is from Ahlul Bayt. He is descended from Imam Ali al-Hadi al-Naqi, who is of course venerated amongst the Shia, but also venerated amongst Sunnis. And the descendants of Imam al-Naqi migrated to Bukhara. Now, the Mongols come and they upturn, they destroy what was really a cradle, a jewel, a center of Islamic culture, civilization, and society in Central Asia. And this is an absolutely cataclysmic event. Nizam ud-Deen Auliya's family flees Bukhara and they go east. But this is the same Mongol invasion that sends Maulana Rumi's family west. And out of this cataclysm, we actually see Islam spread anew in different places. So migration can be quite a traumatic experience, especially forced migration, but there is some wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this as well. So Nizam ud-Deen Auliya is born in a town called Badwan, which is near Delhi, and it's quite a major town of its time, and people who it's home to a lot of Central Asian migrants who come, or let's say refugees who come and settle. And they will settle in Badwan because they want to escape the politics and intrigue and hecticness of Delhi. And we'll talk a bit about Delhi in its time. Nizam ud-Deen Auliya's father passes away early in childhood. So he is Ahlul Bayt, he is a refugee, and he is an orphan. And these three things will play a deep role in who he is to become. As it happens in those times, there's no social system. So you're a refugee family, you're an orphan, you're in a strange land. There's no social system. You have to get by on your own. And he grows up in crippling poverty. No social connections, of course. He decides to become a student of religious knowledge. Now, Nizam ud-Deen Auliya meets many people throughout his life, especially the early portion of his life, that leave a deep imprint and impact on him. Teachers and mystics and so on and so forth. But the first person who really leaves a lasting mark, a really central figure in Hazrat Nizam's tarbiyah, is his mother, Bibi Zulaykha. She's a deeply pious, deeply patient, humble woman. She was born with a silver spoon, born into aristocracy, born into a Sayyid family, and everything gets flipped and upturned and they have to flee to a different land. But she bears this azmaish with grace. She instills in Hazrat Nizam a lifelong spirit of religious devotion, contentment, humility, rigor. And she's devoted to educating her son. And Hazrat Nizam's upbringing by his mother, Bibi Zulaykha, and his sister, Bibi Zainab, older sister, instills in him a lifelong sympathy and empathy and respect for women and what they have to go through, I suppose, in pre-modern life. And this comes through in the Malfuzat, and we'll read some stories as well. There are two wonderful stories about Bibi Zulaykha, may God be pleased with her. One is that Hazrat Nizam tells us he would come home from education, from the madrasa, from the school or whatever, and there would often be no food to eat. And so Bibi Zulaykha would say, "Today we are the guests of God." Hazrat Nizam tells us that sometimes there would be food. There would be food for 1 or 2 or 3 days. But he would long for when she would say the sentence, "Today we are the guests of God." And when she's passing away, Hazrat Nizam tells us the events. He relays this to his disciples. She's passing away on her deathbed. He's quite young, maybe 21, so on and so forth. And he says, "Who will now watch over me? Who will be my support and my shade?" And she has a very famous sentence. She says, "I entrust you to God." So the importance of righteous upbringing, the importance of a righteous mother is deeply important. We look at the lives of many mystics, actually, in Muslim history and many scholars. We will find that often it is the mother who plays a central role in their tarbiyah. Look at the stories of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Gilani or Imam Ibn Hanbal, if I'm not mistaken. And we see the central role of the mother in this tarbiyah. Now, Hazrat Nizam moves with his family to Delhi. He's sort of exhausted all the educational opportunities and avenues in Badwan, and he needs to go to the big city, kind of like how I moved from Bundaberg to Brisbane to come to uni. And Delhi in the 13th century is really one of the world's greatest cities. It's a center of art and culture and politics, center of scholarship. So the Mongol cataclysm drives the Muslim intellectual and spiritual elite east and west, right? East into, for example, Anatolia and Egypt, and west into India. And this plays a key role in germinating new life in the Ummah. Delhi is, of course, the capital of the powerful Delhi Sultanate. It's this very imperialistic, this very militaristic entity. You read the stories or the chronicles, and it's about great kings and great cruelty and big battles and booty won and temples destroyed. And it's quite if you like that sort of thing, it's great. But if you don't like it, it's quite stark history. And Hazrat Nizam gives us, at the very same time, in this very same era, a completely different example of how to live life and how to be with people. It's really interesting. This is a map of the Delhi Sultanate around the time of the life of Hazrat Nizam ud-Deen Auliya. And just after he passes away, the Delhi Sultanate manages to conquer the entire subcontinent, all the way down to modern-day Tamil Nadu. This is one of the structures, very famous Qutub Minar. Those of you who have been to Delhi would have seen this. May God give us the visa to go. It's very hard. And the Qutub Minar is really a symbol of, let's say, the political and cultural power of Islam, which is in Islam in the subcontinent, which by the time of Hazrat Nizam's life, Islam as like a political force has really only been around for about 200 years, so relatively fresh. So in his early education, despite this crippling poverty and sometimes even homelessness, Hazrat Nizam is always dedicated and devoted to his education. He tells a story. He says, once there was a time when I was living with these students. We were in some sort of residence. There was no food. For 3 days we had no food. And on the 3rd day, some kind soul came, and often they would leave what's called a zambil on the door, like a sort of a collection pot. And any kind soul would leave something in it. And he says on the 3rd day, someone left some khichdi, which is a sort of cooked rice dish, very simple. And he says, "Nothing in my life has ever been as tasty as that khichdi." It's a beautiful quote. He comes under the tutelage of various teachers. He's, of course, learning, but he's observing them, their attitude, their lifestyle, their mannerisms, and their motivations. And he's not very impressed with the teachers who are very worldly. They are after money and power and office. And he's quite impressed, quite affected by the teachers who are, let's say, genuine in their pursuit of knowledge and in their spread of knowledge. He studies traditional Islamic sciences, of course. He's especially interested in fiqh and hadith. And later on in his life, he's known as an expert in the science of hadith. He becomes a skilled debater. He's known as al-Bahith, the debater, or Mehfil Shikan, the breaker of assemblies. But as fate would have it, he never got to use these skills. Because there's this tension in his early life. It's this upbringing of great austerity, great difficulty, poverty, and spirituality. And then there's this path of worldly fame and success through scholarship. There's always this tension. Upon completing his formal education, Hazrat Nizam goes to this prominent dervish whom he lived near. And he asks for the blessings to become a qazi. And a qazi is a great position to have. It's like acing the CSS exam in Pakistan, or becoming like a secretary or something. It's a great government office. And the dervish, Sheikh Najib ud-Deen Mutawakkil, he says, don't become a qazi, become something else. So he sees something in Nizam ud-Deen. And Nizam ud-Deen is of course in turmoil, he's confused. He's trying to think about what he should do, making istikhara, all these things. And as the story goes, one day, or one night rather, whilst busy in night prayers, he hears the muazzin recite, أَلَمْ يَعْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَى قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Has the time not yet come for the believers' hearts to be humbled at the remembrance of Allah? And this is like a lightning bolt that hits him. When we have big life decisions to make, we think on it, we reflect on it, we ask people for advice, we make istikhara, and often there's something that pushes us over the edge one way or another, some ishara, some sign. And this is his sign. He decides to set out immediately to seek the shade of a very famous Sufi sheikh. And this sheikh, when he meets him, he recites he recites his own famous, like his own favorite poem, but it becomes very famous in the history of poetry and spirituality in the subcontinent. Because the sheikh who he meets can see how desperate, how passionate Hazrat Nizam is to find some sort of direction. And the very famous sheikh, he says, the poem is "E atish firakat dilha kabab karda, silab ishtiyakat janha kharab karda." Oh, this fire of your separation has burnt many a heart. This flood of your longing has devastated many a soul, many a life. So this is serious business for these people. It's not like they learn a bit about Islam and then they're scrolling on TikTok. This is everything to them. This is their entire existence. The sheikh who he meets, of course, is Baba Farid. Fariduddin Masood Ganj Shakar, who is a very famous spiritual figure in the subcontinent, who passes away in 1268. Very charismatic, very respected scholar. And there's this story about Baba Farid. He goes to Delhi and he's leaving the Jama Masjid. And there are so many people flocking to see him and just see his gaze and just be with him. It's like a horde of people swamping him. And his disciples have to form a circle around him so that they can sort of get through the crowd. Today we see the same scene with completely useless TikTok celebrities. But in that time, people genuinely wanted to be with people of substance. And Baba Farid is based in Ajohan, modern-day Pakpatan, in modern-day Pakistan. He's considered the father of Punjabi literature. We don't have written Punjabi literature before Baba Farid, and it's his example that in a sense, sets the mold. He's a master in the Chishti Sufi order, and we'll talk a bit about the Chishtis later. Hazrat Nizam becomes a disciple at age 20, and Baba Farid is 90. When Hazrat Nizam is in the community of Baba Farid, he of course observes and imbibes this organized pattern of life based on simplicity and austerity and God consciousness. And whilst he's there, he undergoes spiritual training and perfection. So he's working in the kitchen, he's memorizing Quran, he's taking lessons, he's writing out ta'weez for all the people who come to the dargah. It's his job. He has to do all this writing because he's literate, he's a scholar, and he won't make mistakes. And at one point he complains about how hard this is, and Baba Farid has to say, toughen up, beta. There's this epic story where all the disciples and Baba Farid are sitting and they're looking at the manuscript, or they're working through this book. It's a very famous book, Awarif al-Mu'arif of Umar Suhrawardi, very famous Sufi text. And the manuscript has some errors in it. There are some mistakes in the handwriting. So they're working through it, and it's very slow going. And Baba Farid is sort of like correcting it. And Hazrat Nizam says, he interrupts and he says, I know where we can get a good copy. And Baba Farid keeps going. And Hazrat Nizam says again, this is pretty slow going, we can get a better copy. But Baba Farid gets upset. And when Hazrat Nizam realizes this, he's mortified. He gets up, he goes off into the wilderness, he's extremely distressed, he's considering suicide. And one of Baba Farid's sons has to come and intercede, and he brings him back. And when he comes back, Baba Farid says, all this I did for your perfection. The Pir, the Murshid, the Sufi master, is the dresser of brides. Why do you think, question for you all, Baba Farid got upset? Or what was the mistake like Hazrat Nizam made? What do you think? One very obvious. Impatient. Bad adab, right? Interrupting the teacher. But the second thing is, the point wasn't to read Awarif al-Mu'arif. The point wasn't to finish, rather. The point wasn't to finish the book. The point was to sit with the Shaykh and gain the lessons, however long it takes. You finish the book or not, it doesn't matter. But what Baba Farid did was he sensed this intellectual arrogance that was in Hazrat Nizam during his time in Delhi. And this event is sort of a major event where he realizes, actually it's not about finishing the book, I read 50 books in a year or whatever, or I finished the Quran this many times. It's about what you get whilst you're in the process. There's a great poem by Bulle Shah, and inshallah we can do a session on Bulle Shah one day, where Bulle Shah, it's the very first poem in his divan, and he says, and it comes to this story. Bulle Shah says, Alif Allah dil ratta mera minu bedi khabar na kai. Alif Allah dil ratta mera minu bedi khabar na kai. Be pariyan kuch samajh na aave. Alif dil izzat aaye. Ain te ghain, ilm wa gharur, perhaps knowledge and arrogance. Ain te ghain de farak na jana, e gal alif sujai. E bolia kol alif de pure, jere dil di karan safai. Punjabi, and it means, my heart is colored in the alif of Allah. I have no news, I have no khabar of the Be. I tried studying the Be and it didn't make any sense. All the pleasure came from the alif. The difference between ayn and ghain, ilm and gharur maybe, the difference between ayn and ghain, this was taught to me by alif. O Bulia, alif is the whole sentence by which the heart is cleansed. So this is saying the foundation of your search for knowledge should be pure. It shouldn't be impure or improper. What a beautiful poem. I read that and I just was dazed for 5 days, honestly. And Baba Bulle Shah, Hazrat Nizam, he talks about the power of poetry and the power of literature, and we'll get into some of these stories later. Baba Farid sees incredible spiritual capacity in Hazrat Nizam, incredible charisma and capability and competence. He's just a disciple for 3 years, and Baba Farid makes Hazrat Nizam his successor. It actually upsets other people in the Khanqah. The sons of Baba Farid are jealous. There's actually there's some politics behind this. But he makes Hazrat Nizam the successor. And he says to Hazrat Nizam, go to Delhi and spread the Chishti Order in Delhi. And this is the start of a 50-year, I suppose, career or role as a mystical teacher and a guide. And he becomes a very major presence in the city of Delhi. And the way that Baba Farid saw what was in Hazrat Nizam reminds me of a poem by Allama Iqbal, which is Dil bina bikar khuda se talab, aankh ka noor, dil ka noor nahi. Ask God also for insight, not just sight, because the light of the eyes is not the light of the heart. So he sees something very special in Hazrat Nizam. Now, he goes back to Delhi, and this sort of marks a turning point in his life or in his career. I want to talk now a bit about the idea of the Sufi order and explain it conceptually. Otherwise, we won't really understand what was happening or what it meant in that society. Can anyone tell me, what is a Sufi order? I need some audience participation. Come on.
Sufi order is like a spiritual chain from Rasulullah
Mm-hmm.
to the Shaykh
Mm-hmm.
to spread the noor of. So there is the ilm of Rasulullah and there is a batni noor that comes through the Ali and Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu.
Right. Correct. That's the second dot point. The first dot point is basically it's a bunch of people getting together, led by a teacher, focused on self-purification. That's a Sufi order, right? And very important in this idea of the Sufi order is this idea of the chain. So this idea that there is spiritual authority that's passed down. And it's just like the chain of knowledge you have in the other Islamic sciences, right? Like in hadith and so on and so forth. It's a very strong concept of the master and the disciple. The master trains the disciple becomes the new master, so on and so forth. The idea of the Sufi order, it's this focused, organized way to craft the perfect Muslim, rather than everyone doing it on their own, right? And the idea is he or she will then live their life ethically, morally, and be a shining example to others and bring others to Islam as well. And it's these Sufi orders who are primarily responsible for the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa and Central Asia and India and Indonesia. You think any Hindu saw the rampaging army of Alauddin Khilji or Muhammad Tughlaq and said, yes, I want to be a Muslim. These guys are doing a great job. This is a great philosophy. No, these kings may have crafted a particular political scenario, but it was these Sufi figures who showed what this religion is and what it means to be Muslim. And of course we have major Sufi orders like the Chishtiya, the Naqshbandiya, Qadriya, Shadiliya, Tijani, Mevlevi, so on and so forth. And they all seem to take a particular cultural orientation. They take on features of where they emerge. It's a really interesting example of how spirituality and creativity plays out. Now the Chishti order is the order we're most interested in. It originates in the town of Chisht in modern-day Afghanistan around the year 930. And it's brought to the Indian subcontinent by Hazrat Muinuddin Chishti, who's also known as Khwaja Gharib Nawaz. If anyone has ever heard the wonderful song by A.R. Rahman, Khwaja Mere Khwaja, for instance, that's an ode to Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti. Khwaja Gharib Nawaz basically means the benefactor of the poor. And he has this wonderful quote, and this is the Chishti ethos: be generous like the river, show love like the sun, be humble like the soil. And he's buried in Ajmer in Rajasthan, which is a major center of Muslim spiritual life, cultural life. The Chishti Order is extremely influential in Indian Muslim history. It's the largest order even today. There's a big emphasis originally on renunciation of the world, asceticism and austerity. And of course, it's the Chishtis who are the inventors and promoters of Qawwali, which is basically Hindu music with Islamic lyrics. So they take the local culture, they Islamize it. And it's this epic vehicle for dawah and spiritual nourishment. And in some of the malfuzat, in the discourses, Hazrat Nizam, of course, talks about this Qawwali, more or less. We'll read some stories. Yes?
Is this the grave in Ajmer?
Yes, that's the grave of Hazrat Muinuddin Chishti, very famous. Now, we talked about the Sufi order. It's this vehicle for self-purification, this organized path. Because tariqah, Sufi tariqah also means path. There's another important concept another important place in the life, in Muslim civilization, and that is the Khanqah, or the Zawiya, or the Tekke, or the Dargah, or the Sufi lodge. Different words for different cultures. It's all the same place. We won't understand most of Muslim history if we don't understand what the Sufi order meant and what the Khanqah meant. It's the center of Sufi activity. It's where these big ideas actually get translated practically. It's like a monastery, but it's not exclusive. So it's not like a Christian monastery. They're open to all. It's like a commune, but there's a very strong hierarchy. So it's not on this like equal basis. It's collective living headed by the sheikh. And it's a teaching center, it's a welfare center, it's a site of self-purification. And of course the Chishti silsilas specialize in langar, which is the mass feeding of everyone who comes and visits, regardless of distinction. Langar is really famous. It's become, I suppose, famous, or the concept of langar, you'll have seen it in Sikh gurdwaras, for instance. But I was shocked when I learned that the word langar is actually a Persian word, because Muslims were doing langar long before Sikhism ever emerged as a religion. Now, let's talk about life in Hazrat Nizam's Khanqah. It's located on the banks of the Jamuna River in a village outside Delhi. So fresh air, away from the hustle and bustle and chaos and corruption of city life, essentially. And it has temporary and permanent residents. It has disciples also living nearby. There's massive kitchen, 24-hour food distribution. Thousands of people daily come and they're fed. And we're told that Hazrat Nizam ensures that you have the best food that is served. So good quality food. Women form a large part of the following that emerges around Hazrat Nizam, as well as, of course, non-Muslims. The Khanqah is given this near constant stream of gifts and donations, food and raw materials and clothing and money. It just comes in. We don't know from where. No one knows from where. It just comes in. So much barakah, right? It's like the bird, the parable of the bird who leaves in the morning without knowing where the rizq will come from. That's how the Khanqah operates. And there's this daily schedule, prayer and fasting and worship and study, tutoring of disciples and meeting of visitors. Hazrat Nizam, by the way, also fasted almost every day of his life. So the daily schedule of the Khanqah is built around his fasting when he's breaking fast and starting suhoor. I mentioned he's constantly meeting visitors, petitioners, people who come and they want a dua answered, they want some advice. There's this wonderful story where people come to Hazrat Nizam and say, you know, people have been talking about you. They say that you have no worries, you know. You're so popular. People come to you and they tell you stuff and things are good for you. And Hazrat Nizam says, he replies and he says, nobody in this world has more worries than I. So many people come to me confiding in me their woes and their worries. All of these accounts of misery and sorrow sear my heart and wear down my soul. This is actually a lesson for how to be empathetic. What does it mean to listen? What does it mean to share in someone's grief? You know, in Urdu, the word for empathetic is ghamkhar. Ghamkhar means the one who eats grief. You share your grief with someone And if they're sincere, they eat your grief. They chew on it. They feel every texture of your grief. Gham khar. This is a great example of gham khari. The Khanqah is also, as I mentioned, a welfare center. It provides support and assistance to nearby peoples and groups. Hazrat Nizam would even, they would take note of people who would come regularly to the Khanqah. They would investigate their circumstances, and then they would put them on a list, and they would be given regular financial aid and assistance. I'm going to read 3 stories that demonstrate practically how the Khanqah was like this welfare center. So it says here, one day some houses in Gyathpur caught fire, so where the Khanqah was. It was a very hot summer day. The Sheikh rushed to the roof of his house barefoot and stood there until the fire was completely extinguished. He then deputed Iqbal, who managed the Khanqah, to count the houses that had been burnt. He sent to every house 2 silver coins, 2 trays of food, and 1 pitcher of cold water. In those days, 2 silver coins sufficed for buying all the essentials for a household. Another day, the Sheikh saw an old woman drawing water from a well near the river. He stopped and inquired from the woman, "Since the Jamuna is so near, why do you take the trouble of drawing water from this well?" And the woman replied, "I have an old, destitute husband. We have nothing to eat. The water of the Jamuna is very tasty, and it induces hunger because it quickens our appetite. So the sweet water gives them more of an appetite. I do not take water from the river." The Sheikh was deeply shaken at this explanation. Returning to the Khanqah, he summoned Iqbal and said, "Lala." Lala means like uncle. You know, in Saraiki we say Lala. Or it means big brother, na? Lala means big brother in Saraiki. That's so interesting. So this is like the local Hindi that he's speaking. In our Gyathpur, there is a woman so poverty-stricken, she does not drink the Jamuna water for fear of getting hungry. Go to her house, find her daily needs, and every month without fail, give her that amount. On another occasion, hearing about an imminent Mongol invasion, large numbers of people from adjacent areas flocked to the Khanqah of Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen. They sought refuge within its walls, and the Sheikh did not disappoint. He provided both food and shelter to these people, and at the same time, he told disciples who had come to see him to leave, to make room for these people. Now let's talk about what Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya did with the Chishti Order. Because he turns the Chishti Order from this vehicle of individual salvation to a mass movement, focused on moral and spiritual regeneration. He trains and sends out 700 deputies or khalifas all across the subcontinent, and then they open up hundreds of Khanqahs. The method is he's focused on a core group of disciples, senior disciples, and they are beholden, they're sworn to austerity and poverty and spiritual life. And then they go on and teach others. And all of these senior disciples like Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Chirag or Sheikh Gharibuddin Mazret? Yes, Burhan Gharibuddin, I think. So they become epic figures in their own right. And it's sort of like the Prophet training the Sahaba and then the Sahaba going out and them becoming titans in their own right. Or Hazrat Isa training his Hawariyin, his disciples, and then them going out and becoming great figures in their own right. Hazrat Nizam also has disciples amongst all classes. They're participants in society, but they're expected to hold to high ethical standards. So common people and merchants and nobles and army officers and scholars and officials. And the most famous of these is Hazrat Amir Khusro, who's a court poet, a literateur, a scholar, a musicologist, and actually Hazrat Nizam's best friend. They have such an intimate relationship. Every night, the last person that Hazrat Nizam would see is Hazrat Amir Khusro. He would come and call Amir Khusro, and they would talk. Amir Khusro would give reports of what's happening in the court. He would give news, and Hazrat Nizam would say, "Oh Turk, because Amir Khusro was Turkish origin. Tell me more, tell me more. And Amir Khusro also has a central role in the development of Qawwali as well, because he's a musicologist. It's said he invents instruments and he understands the music very well. Let's talk about the Chishti attitude to the state. So the early Chishti saints preached independence from the state. They rejected government patronage and gifts. Hazrat Nizam says, "My house has two doors. If the Sultan enters by one, I will make my exit by the other." Because government service and government itself was seen as spiritually corrosive, morally doubtful, and government as a tool of dynastic and class interests, distant from the masses. There's this event, there's this story in Fawaid ul-Fuad, the discourses, where Hazrat Nizam is giving, he's talking about the importance of distributing wealth amongst the people. And if you read the historical context in the introduction, it says, the day before this speech, an army, Delhi Sultanate army, comes back from the south carrying massive wealth, and they pile it in the square, and it's so dazzling. And then the next day, Hazrat Nizam gives this speech, and he talks about the importance of spending wealth correctly. So you don't get the political context just from the book, you have to read from other sources. But every story, every speech has a purpose. However, this isolationist attitude didn't mean indifference to the people and to society. They weren't locked away in their Khanqahs as monks focused on themselves, not at all. They chose a different way of engaging with society. And Hazrat Nizam would actually use his disciples, like Hazrat Amir Khusro, Hassan Sijzi and other people, with government connections to influence policy. And also head off, if the Sultan is upset with the Khanqah for some reason, he wants to do something, close it down, whatever. So he uses his disciples in high places to finesse. I want to talk about the effect that Hazrat Nizam had on society at the time. So, this is a bit of a long quote. We have the testimony of the contemporary historian and also disciple of Hazrat Nizam ud-Deen Auliya, Ziauddin Barani, who writes a very famous history of the Delhi Sultanate, Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi. And he's also a member of the court. He says, I'm going to read here, but this is part of the quote. On the one side, Sultan Alauddin Khilji, for the welfare and security of his state, had by terror, force, punishments, severities, chains and imprisonments, forbidden intoxicants and other forbidden things that were the means to wickedness. And on the other hand, Shaykh Nizam ud-Deen had in those very days opened wide the doors of his discipleship. He gave the patched frock to sinners, administered the oath of repentance to them. The consciousness of being a disciple of the Shaykh prevented people from doing things forbidden. Men and women, old and young, shopkeepers and the general public, slaves, servants, and boys of young age began saying their prayers, even supplicatory prayers, chasht and ishraq, nawafil prayers. The hearts of elites and non-elites became inclined towards good thoughts and good deeds. The very name of wine, gambling, and other forbidden things never came to anyone's lips because these were seen as sins and vices, and they appeared to people as bad as infidelity. So Barani is actually giving us two models for how to manage a Muslim society. One model is you can do it by force and by the power of the state. And there's another model where you can convince people to discipline themselves. And the first model has its logic, potentially, but the second model is more sustainable and produces healthier, spiritually and psychologically healthier people. And we just have to look at what's happening in the world. I mean, very crudely, do you like the Taliban's model or do you like Hazrat Nizam's model? What will produce a better society? Now, the tomb of Hazrat Nizam here in Delhi becomes a major religious and cultural site in Delhi and in North India. The tomb structure is built by later kings. They patronize the tomb. They build these mosques and structures around it. And figures in later Indian history, especially in Mughal history, like Humayun and Jahanara bint Shah Jahan, Ghalib, Muhammad Shah, all of these great political and cultural figures, they all want to be buried nearby, and they are all buried nearby, seeking the spiritual phase or presence of Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya. Let's talk about Hazrat Nizam's goals and key teachings. There's a couple. Ultimately, Hazrat Nizam wanted to teach the significance of submission to God. What does it mean to actually be a Muslim? What does it mean to submit? He wanted to reduce human suffering. This comes out very clearly. Charity was not about giving coins out, but the sense of material security that came from not having to worry about starving, it facilitates internal reflection and inner peace. And this inner peace is the pathway to reorienting the human personality. There's very deep logic behind the social work that Hazrat Nizam is doing. He also wants to reduce sin, of course. Sin and wrongdoing in society. And he wants to fashion sensitive, thoughtful, moral human beings. Right? You can be a Muslim, but can you be a human being? Ghalib says, very famous poem, बस के दुश्वार है हर काम का आसान होना, आदमी को भी मुयस्सर नहीं इंसान होना. How difficult it is for the adami, like the physical being, the man, to become a human, to become a spiritual being. And through all of this, you see this ethos of human love and goodwill and tolerance and altruism and material simplicity. Let's talk, and we'll break very soon, let's talk about the discourses, Fawaid ul-Fuad. Fawaid ul-Fuad means morals of the heart, more or less. And it's basically, that should say compilation. First compilation of discourses produced in the subcontinent. So sort of like the earliest example. It's records of 188 meetings spanning the years 1308 to 1322. Moral and spiritual and religious and aesthetic discussions, stories and anecdotes. It's written in Persian, of course, the most important language of the time. And it found great popularity within the lifetime of Hazrat Nizam, who personally reviewed it. It's considered historically robust and authentic. And it's written by one of Hazrat Nizam's disciples and another Delhi Sultanate court official and poet called Amir Hassan Sijzi. And Sijzi is a wonderful poet. He's called Saadi-e Gulistan or Saadi-e Sani, the Saadi of India. Did I say Saadi-e Gulistan? I meant to say Saadi-e Hindustan, the Saadi of India, or the second Saadi. And it's actually a great, apart from its spiritual succor, it's a valuable insight into life in medieval Delhi. You read this, you get a great insight into what the challenges of the people were and what the different social and political forces were. Let's talk a bit about Hazrat Nizam's style of teaching. Hazrat Nizam didn't prefer to directly advise or preach. He always used examples and stories that were alongside the message he wanted to get across. Or sometimes he wouldn't even say the message, he'd just give a story. Because there's something very deep about this. Stories and poems prompt thinking and reflection in the mind of the one who's reading, or the listener, or the one who has an issue. Every story in Fuad is prompted by a question from someone, or a real world situation. Because stories and poetry let us unpack the complexity of the human experience. You can have a khatib give a khutbah, or you can read Gulistan-e-Saadi or Masnavi of Maulana Rumi, which is just stories, or these malfuzat, which are anecdotes, and they force us to think and reflect. And everyone gets something different from these stories, because what's said then has to mold with our experience of life. And we get a chance to appreciate the nuances and complexities of what it means to be a human being. Another thing is that, and this is really, I think, an important point, Hazrat Nizam always worked to redirect human creativity. He never suppressed it. So Amir Khusro and Sijzi, they were court poets, and they lived extravagant lifestyles. They lived a courtly life, if you will. And they wrote, erotic, romantic poetry. And later on in their lives, when they became disciples, Hazrat Nizam didn't say, don't write poetry. He said, use your poetry for a higher purpose. And it becomes elevated. And that's why we read this poetry. For Amir Khusro's poetry has a central place in Qawwali. And we're listening to it and meditating on it and entranced and transfixed by it 800 years later. Contrast this way of dealing with human creativity from Masalan, a Salafi style of Islam. Don't draw, don't write, don't dance, don't sing. Just stay in this box out of fear that you'll do something wrong. This is a different style of dealing with the energy that the human soul has. And I think it creates, and it definitely creates, more mature, more thoughtful, more balanced, inshallah, people and human beings. And we'll see this coming through the Malfuzat. So right now we'll take a break. Thank you all for listening. Maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. There's some zarda in the back. Have some chai. We'll come back and we'll read some stories. Tamam? Okay. Thanks for coming. We're back after the break. One of the attendees asked me to recite Ghalib's poem again. So I'll give the full translation this time. Bas ke dushwar hai har kaam ka aasan hona, aadmi ko bhi muyassar nahi insan hona. Insofar as it is impossible for everything to be easy, how difficult it is for the Adami to become a human. Or for the Muslim to become a human. Okay. So we'll read some stories from Fawaid ul-Fuad, and we'll see how we go. Hopefully there's not too many stories. I just went through the whole book, and everything that stood out to me I picked out. And it's sort of also arranged thematically as well. The first thing is a story about two types of worship. So it says here, and all of these stories are listed, the day is listed, Sunday the 3rd of Muharram 708, or the 23rd of June 1308. I obtained the blessing of kissing the Master's feet. Every entry starts with this sentence, Dawlat-e pai bosi yaftam. The topic of discourse was devotion to God. There are two forms of devotion, he explained, Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya. One is lazimi, the other is muta'addi. The translation didn't give the right words, by the way. One is lazimi, and the other is muta'addi. And anyone who's studied grammar, Arabic grammar, will know these two words, or actually English grammar. One is intransitive, and the other is transitive. There are two types of worship. One remains inside, and the other is pushed externally. Lazmi devotion is that from which the benefit is limited to one person, that is, to the performer of that devotion. Whether it be canonical prayers, fasting, pilgrimage to Hajj, invocations, doing the tasbih, and so on and so forth. But the muta'addi devotion is that which brings benefit and comfort to others, whether through the expenditure of money or demonstration of compassion or other ways of helping one's fellow man. Such actions are called muta'addi devotion. Their reward is incalculable. It's limitless. In lazmi devotion, one has to be sincere to merit divine acceptance. But in muta'addi devotion, even one's sins become a source of reward. May God grant success. So here the Chishti ethos, what Hazrat Nizam is saying, he's not just saying pray and then do good in the society around you, that's like a good secondary thing you should do. He's actually saying, no, there are two types of ibadat. There are two types of worship. One is for yourself, and the other is that which benefits others. That's also ibadat. That's what he's saying here. Let's read a story about purification. 27th of January 1308. The conversation next turned to purification. To perfect his soul, explained the Master, man must do 4 things: eat little, talk little, sleep little, and also socialize little. And of course, we live in an age where we talk a lot, we eat a lot. I don't know if we sleep a lot, but we also socialize a lot, or too much. Like, we live in an age that's, you could call it the talking age. People just talk all the time. They make useless videos and just useless content, and we're swamped by this information. So that's not a good recipe for a spiritual heart. Another story, the meaning of renouncing worldliness and the stew analogy. This is a famous story in Fawaid ul-Fuad. Because they loved using stories and anecdotes to explain complex concepts, simple analogies and metaphors, right? 30th of March, 1308. After that, the master told the following story about a certain saint. Many times he used to say that all virtuous deeds, such as prayers, fasting, invocations, and doing the rosary, the tasbih, they're like a cauldron, or they're like ingredients in a cauldron. But the basic staple in the cauldron is meat. Without meat, you do not perceive any of these virtuous deeds. Finally, they asked that peer, many times you have used this analogy, but now can you explain it? Meat, replied the saint, is renouncing worldliness. While prayer, fasting, invocation, the rosary, all of these and all such virtuous deeds presuppose that the one who does them has left the world and is no longer attached to any worldly thing. Whether he observes or doesn't observe prayer, invocation, and other practices, there is no cause for fear. But if friendship with the world lingers in his heart, he derives no benefit from supplications and invocations. After that, the master observed, if one puts ghee, pepper, garlic, and onion into a cauldron and adds only water, the end result is known as pseudo-stew, whatever pseudo-stew means in Farsi. The basic staple for stew is meat. There may or may not be the other ingredients. Similarly, the basis for spiritual progress is leaving the world, and these other practices may or may not be there. The master then began to talk about what renouncing worldliness actually entailed. Renouncing worldliness does not mean, for instance, that one becomes naked, wearing only a loincloth and sitting in solitude, so the classic Hindu yogi. Renouncing worldliness means instead to wear clothes, please wear clothes, to take food, whilst at the same time keeping in continuous use whatever comes to hand, feeling no inclination to hoard and no attachment to material objects. That disposition alone is tantamount to renouncing worldliness. So the most important thing Hazrat Nizam is saying for a Muslim is ultimately their mindset, or let's say their heart set. If that's not in the right place, then all of these other rituals that we do or are supposed to do or can do won't have their full effect. But if you have the heart in the right place and the rituals, then that's the golden mean. I don't know. I just made that up. I'm not very good at geometry. Another story. This one is nice. Potentially some of you can relate to this. 26th of June, 1315. In a similar vein, he told a story. In the days of his youth, Sheikh Abdullah Mubarak fell in love with a young woman. One night he went to her house and stood beneath a window in the wall nearest her room. And that woman put her head out the window. They began to converse. Throughout the night, they remained totally absorbed in their conversation. And they were still telling each other stories when the call for dawn prayer was broadcast. Abdullah reckoned that it was the call for Isha. And when he came to his senses, he saw that dawn had disappeared. At that moment, he heard a piercing voice. "O Abdullah, for the love of a woman, from nightfall to daybreak, you have remained awake. During no evening have you been so attentive for the love of God." Abdullah, on hearing these words, repented on the spot, became fully immersed in God, and this rebuke was the cause of his repentance. Reminds me of my youth. Let's talk about two stories about prayer and focus and meditation. This is a really fascinating story. This is a story essentially of a miracle. And often there are stories of miracles that happen, that miracles are discussed or disclosed. 20th of April, 1308. After that, he told me about a certain Muslim who was amongst the disciples of Sheikh Bahauddin Zakaria, who is buried in Multan. May God have peace, may God have mercy upon him. The disciple was known as Hassan Afghan. He was a pillar of saintliness. One time, Hassan Afghan was passing through a town and arrived at the mosque in time for prayer. The Imam led the prayer and the people followed along. Khwaja Hassan also joined in. When the prayers were completed and the congregation had dispersed, he slowly went up to the Imam and said, "Respected sir, you began the prayers and I fell in with you. But you went from here to Delhi, you bought some slaves, you came back, then you took the slaves to Khorasan, and then you came back to Multan. I got my neck twisted trying to catch up with you. What has all this to do with prayer?" What's the story talking about?
He's thinking about business alone.
Yeah. I once said to one of my uncles, he did Dars Nizami, but he didn't end up becoming a Maulana. Very funny, very sarcastic, sardonic person. I said, "Mamu, main namaz mein tawajjuh nahi de sakta hu." He looks at me, smokes his cigarette, and he says, "Koi bhi nahi kar sakta hai." I said, "Uncle, I can't focus in prayer. Can you give me some advice?" And he said, "No one can focus in prayer." That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. This is a really interesting story. 10th of August, 1311. And this is Amir Hassan Sijzi, who compiled the discourses. He is talking to Hazrat Nizam ud-Deen Auliya, and he says, "At this point I interjected, I said something, Sijzi. On every occasion that I recite the Quran, more of its meaning unfolds for me than I had ever before understood. During recitation, if my mind is distracted by some thought or my heart moved by some desire, I catch myself and I ask, what is this thought? What is this desire? And I keep asking myself these questions until my heart becomes clear in focus. And at that same instant, I chance upon a verse which counters that desire, or else I recall a verse which solves the difficulty that had been vexing my heart. The Master, may God remember him with favor, after he had heard me, commented, 'This is a fine practice, and you should continue to pursue it. Praise be to God, Lord of the universe.' I went to therapy, and the psychologist said to me, 'If you're trying to focus, don't suppress the thought, work through the thought.' And here, this is a Chishti Sufi practice, basically. If you're having trouble focusing, work through it. And Osman Saab is a psychiatrist, psychologist. He can attest, I'm sure, to the hopefully the validity of this practice. I just read this. I thought this is so contemporary and so wonderful and so insightful. Let's read some stories about food and feeding. Of course, great Chishti practice. "15th of December, 1308. I obtained the blessing of kissing the Master's feet. Conversation turned to the virtue of giving food to others. On the blessed tongue of the Master came these words: 'There is no merit attached to providing food for your own people.' Then he began to talk of Khwaja Ali, the son of Khwaja Ruknuddin, a venerable Chishti saint. He was taken captive during the onslaught of the infidel Mongols. They brought him before Genghis Khan. At the time, one of the disciples of that noble dynasty of Chishti saints was present, but not only present, but he was in a position of authority at the Mongol court. By the way, you can see here how the Mongols conquered. They didn't just kill and slaughter, but they actually incorporated local elements to sustain their rule. When he saw that Khwaja Ali had been taken prisoner, he was dumbfounded. To himself he thought, how can I procure his release? In what way should I mention his name before Genghis Khan? If I say that he comes from a noble family and he's a saint, what will Genghis Khan care? If I mention his obedience and devotion, that too will have no effect. After pondering for a long time, he went before Genghis Khan and announced, the father of this man was a saint who gave food to people. He ought to be set free. Did he give food to his own people, asked Genghis Khan, or to people who were strangers? Everyone provides food for his own people, replied the courtier. But the father of this man gave food to strangers. Genghis Khan was very pleased with this reply. A saint, he noted, and this is Genghis Khan giving ethical instruction, of course, supremely qualified, is someone who gives food to God's people. And he immediately ordered them to set Khwaja Ali free. He also gave this son saint a cloak and apologized for having detained him. In every religion, concluded the master, Hazrat Nizam, may God remember him with favor. Giving food to others is a commendable action. 14th December 1311. I obtained the good fortune of kissing his feet. The topic was feeding others. Darveshhood, he remarked, so being a Sufi, being a spiritual person, consists of this. Every person should first be greeted with peace, then he should be served food. And then only then should one engage in storytelling and conversation. That's why we had the food in the middle of the session. This is a story about eating consciously. This really affected me when I read it. 29th of March, 1314. I obtained the benefit of kissing his hand. Conversation focused on the men of God. Every morsel that they eat with their focus on God. He recollected that Sheikh Shahabuddin, may God sanctify his lofty secret, in Awarif al-Mu'arif, cited the example of a dervish who at every meal, before every bite, would utter aloud, I take this in the name of God. Every bite. And it was also a Chishti practice before the meal to recite a surah from, an ayah from Surah Maida about food and the blessing of food and rizq. And I think that's wonderful. Unfortunately, today we eat, but there has to be the TV on. We eat, the phone has to be next to us. And that's actually such nashukri, right? Food is such a blessing, but it comes to us so easily. We forget how hard it was and how difficult it was to just even have a meal every day for most people in human history. So this is beautiful for me. And often when I'm eating and I'm watching TV or I'm on my phone, I often think about this story and I think, no, I should try and be conscious of this food and I should focus on it. And actually, purely self-interested, you can actually enjoy it more, like you're tasting every morsel, tasting every bite, rather than focused on something else. Yeah. And this attitude of being conscious at every moment is something I've seen in spiritual circles. So I remember I was with my sheikh. At that time he wasn't my sheikh, and it was Maghrib time. And the Chishtis have this practice where at Maghrib time they light a candle or a chirag or something. And so I said to Pir Sahib, I said, why are you lighting this candle, this chirag at Maghrib? What's the logic behind this? And I thought he would say, there's like a hadith, there's, our elders did this is why we do this. He simply just said, it's such a beautiful time. It's Maghrib. The universe itself is cycling to its second shift. The angels are going from here to there. Every atom is singing in praise of God. Why wouldn't we light a candle to remember this moment and make this moment sacred for us, special for us? I was so affected by that because we live so much of our lives in ghafla actually, especially with modern technology. Yeah. There's another story I can tell. We were once in a gathering and someone brought out an instrument, like a flute or something. And then everyone was like, they took the instrument, they kissed it like this and they passed it on. And afterwards I said to Sheikh Saab, said, was this like the flute of Hazrat Dawood or something? Why is everyone, giving it such sanctity? He said, this is a completely ordinary instrument, but it serves us, so we honor it. I've even seen them kissing glasses before giving them out to people. The glass serves us. It does a khidmah, so we should honor it. And if that's the dignity and waqar that they give to inanimate objects, how should a person be treated? Let's read some stories about Hazrat Nizam's interactions with non-Muslims. Remembering that non-Muslims have always been the majority in the subcontinent and are still the majority in the subcontinent. So subcontinent Islam and Tasawwuf, for better or worse, has really been shaped by this phenomenon of being a minority. So 31st of May, 1312. After that, he offered a personal reflection. Once I came into the presence of the great Sheikh in Ajohan, so Baba Farid. A yogi entered, and I, Hazrat Nizam, asked him, what path do you follow? What is the basis of your spiritual discipline? He's curious, he's interested. And the yogi replied, in our science it has been set forth as follows. In the soul of man there are two worlds. One is the higher world, the other is the lower world. From the forehead to the navel is the higher world. From the navel to the feet is the lower world. The guideline is this. In the higher world, sincerity, purity, high morals, and good conduct prevail. But in the lower world, watchfulness must be exercised to ensure purity and chastity. The Master, may God remember him with favor, added, his explanation pleased me greatly. So the yogi here is giving some description of Vedic or some sort of Hindu belief, chakras and energy points and something like that. And he's in the dargah. Sheikh Nizam is asking him, what's your belief? I want to understand. So we see from this openness and curiosity and humility. There's a famous story where Hazrat Nizam is standing on the roof of the dargah in Delhi, and he looks out, it's by the river, and he sees Hindus worshipping some idols by the river. Maybe they're submersing the idols as they do often in like Mathura and in Benares and in other places. And this verse comes to him, and he says, Har qaum rastirahi dini kiblagahi. Every nation has its path, has its religion, has its place of worship. There's another incident where, actually this is a poem of Amir Khusro, remember? So his poetry is completely in the mold of Hazrat Nizam ud-Deen. He says, Eze but tana be Hindu bari, hamze ve amoz parastish gari. O you who sneers at the idolatry of the Hindu, learn at least how to worship from him. What do these stories mean? What is the Chishti ethos, or what is Hazrat Nizam saying? What's being said here? Any ideas, any thoughts? Yes?
Maybe he's recognizing the sincerity and devotion in those people, even if from our perspective might be misdirected.
Definitely. Any other thoughts?
He was trying to benefit who he can. You have to follow them. Benefit.
This sometimes shows the way he was thinking or on thought. He gave respect to that Hindu man. Because we can only learn when we respect other person. So even everybody is respectful. Everybody has some positive points in them. So whatever is what we see, although we don't agree, but still try to find something positive.
So the ethos is not, all religions are correct, but it's that everyone is a person and everyone has this spiritual desire and this longing. And we shouldn't be arrogant. We shouldn't look at them and say, look, we're better than them. if you're arrogant and if you're focused on the wrongdoings of others, how can you ever fix yourself? Why would they ever come to you if you are sneering at them? There's a story, 10th of November, 1317. A disciple of the master arrived and brought a Hindu friend with him. He introduced him by saying, "This is my brother." And when he had greeted both of them, the master, may God remember him with favor, asked that disciple, "And does this brother of yours have any inclination toward Islam?" It is to this end," replied the disciple, "I have brought him to the master. By the blessing of your gaze, he might become Muslim." The master, may God remember him with favor, became teary-eyed. He said, "You can talk to these people as much as you want, and no one's heart will be changed. But if you find the company of a righteous person, then it may be hoped that by the blessing of his company, the other will become a Muslim." And then he tells a story about Hazrat Umar bin al-Khattab. And then there's another story here. I'll read this one. The master, may God remember him with favor, when he came to this point in the story, he began to cry. And then in connection to the topic of sincerity and honesty amongst Muslims, he told the following story. This is a famous story. I've heard this elsewhere. There was a Jew who lived in the neighborhood of Khwaja Bayezid Bistami, a very famous early Sufi. May God sanctify his lofty secret. When Khwaja Bayezid Bistami died, they said to that Jew, "Why did you not become a Muslim?" "If Islam is what Bayezid professed," the Jew replied, "then how can I ever hope to attain it? But if Islam is what you profess, then of such an Islam I would be ashamed." How's everyone going? How are we going for time? Good? Good? Yep, anytime, please. Okay. Another story, 15th of December, 1317. He told the following story. Maulana Alaa ud-Deen, who is one of Hazrat Nizam's tutors and teachers early in his life, had an old servant who was newly indentured. And the historical context tells us this was a Hindu. Near Badawan was a shady grove named Kathir. The servant came from that place. One day the servant began to cry. Maulana Alaa ud-Deen asked, "Why do you cry?" And he said, "I have a son, but I'm now separated from him." The Maulana said, "If I take you to this reservoir that is 2 miles outside the city, Badawan, on the road to Kathir, do you know the way home?" "I know it," replied the servant. And in the morning, the Maulana took him from the house and left him, leaving him at the reservoir, and went away. At this point in the story, the master, may God remember him with favor, became teary-eyed. He said, "The externalist scholars, the ones who are only focused on the law and fiqh, will never grasp this meaning. Yet one can understand what the Maulana was trying to do." You see, letting the Hindu slave go meant that he would have become like Muslim. He was Muslim or he had been converted, but letting him go back to his community would have meant that he would have gone back to Hinduism. How would he have been able to maintain his Islam, if indeed he was interested in maintaining his Islam in his original community? But here, Maulana Alaa ud-Deen and then Hazrat Nizam is telling this story to his disciples, and it's been read for 800 years. He's saying human compassion is more important than converting people to Islam, basically. Yes, Doctor?
I was going to ask about the experience of poverty and hunger. I mean, obviously the rizq comes from Allah, but it seems as though it's such a reoccurring theme in the stories of Muslims across time and across place, and it's something that clearly has shaped people of intellect and certainly of piety as well. And if we think about, like, I just want your perspective on this, because you've deeply studied various societies and the politics in those places as well. How is it that we have these grand courts, presumably they are very wealthy? How does it sit alongside such a depth of poverty where people don't have food for 3 days? What are your insights or understanding of those social contexts? Where how does that? And we've got the system of zakat and so forth and sadaqah. How does it happen that so many people would go hungry in a context like that?
It's a great question. There's no lack of wealth. It seems that in the pre-modern Muslim context, expectations from government were far more limited. It wasn't necessarily seen as the government's job to end hunger or something, or to even feed people. So the role of executive authority was to maintain law and order, prevent external invasion. And this was pretty much it. And what you see in Muslim societies is there are other social institutions. There are Sufi zawiyas, there are the Waqfs, there are soup kitchens, all of these institutions that emerge, and they're separate from the state, that do this social work. Hospitals are not necessarily run by the state, they're Waqfs. Orphanages will be Waqfs, and soup kitchens and madrasas. So these were all separate from the state. Often rulers or prominent noble people, they would start Waqfs, they would fund these, and then of course you cannot understand medieval Islam or most of Muslim history without the Waqf institution. It's been estimated in some parts of the Muslim world, in the Middle Ages or the high period of Islam, potentially up to 50% of all land was Waqf land. And Waqf, of course, the idea of a Waqf is it's a charitable endowment in perpetuity, and the money that comes from the Waqf goes back into charitable purposes. And no one owns the Waqf. It's not to be touched, not to be altered. And of course, when the colonialists come to Muslim lands, the first thing they dismantle is the Waqf. So, yes, expectations from executive authority were more limited, and there were other social institutions that filled in the place. So whether they worked well or they didn't work well is a separate story. Yeah. So I hope that answers somewhat. This is a story about the well, the woman, and the mad saint. And I read this, and I was just so like stunned by this story, I suppose. Very interesting story. So it's 14th of February 1318. The master told a story about a dervish from Gujarat. A dervish who in turn told him a story. So he's hearing a story from someone else. This was the story. I happened upon a mad dervish in Gujarat. United with God, he was the mediator of divine secrets. I and that mad dervish occupied the same home. We even slept in the same room. Once I went to a reservoir that is well known, a reservoir in which no one is allowed to set foot. I was well known to the custodians of that reservoir, however, so they let me perform my ablutions. Some women, hoping to fill their pitchers, came to that reservoir but were not allowed to use it. Maybe they were the wrong social caste, maybe they were Hindu untouchables, who knows. They were not allowed to use it, that is until an old woman approached me and asked if I could fill her pitcher for her. I did, and returned it to her. Then another old woman came with the same request, and I complied for her too. Then another and another and another, and I had filled and fetched 5 pitchers of water to these women. After I departed and went back to my room, and that mad dervish was still asleep, so he was asleep the whole time. Soon after my return, the call for prayer came, and he was still sleeping. I made the call to prayer in a loud voice. So he, for some reason, does the azan in the room to wake up the mad dervish. The mad saint bolted awake. He turned to me and he exclaimed, "What sort of racket is this?" The azan. "What sort of racket is this? True work is to fetch and fill and return the water pitchers of women. And praise be to God, the Lord of the universe." So here, what is the story? What's the moral? What does Hazrat Nizam want to tell the listeners? What do you guys think?
Means to worship is to benefit others.
If the saint misses his prayer, that's on him, right? But true worship is to benefit others, yes. A very interesting story. So it's shaping this ethos of, it's never saying, the stories never say don't do your ibadah, don't do the rituals, but it's trying to shape a particular psychology actually. 2 stories about women. 17th of December 1308. The evening came and it was Friday evening. A woman presented herself to the master and professed allegiance to him. He began to comment on the numerous benefits that accrue from the virtue of women. The master declared, when a wild lion comes into an inhabited area from the forest, no one asks, is it male or female? Similarly, the sons of Adam, whether they be men or women, must devote themselves to obedience and piety. So he's saying that men and women are equally able to progress spiritually, and they're of equal spiritual capacity. This is really important because there's spiritual discourse at the time and afterwards that say, no, women can't be like men spiritually. They're inherently faulty, basically. 18th of November, 1318. Conversation then turned to this. If someone has asked a question, this is why this is being talked about. If someone has a continuous flow of menstrual blood or a prolonged hemorrhage or some other health problem, what is to be done? Once, remarked the master, a woman came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and described her condition, namely that she had a continuous flow of blood. What is my remedy? She asked. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, perform ablution at each time of prayer, even if blood flows upon the prayer mat. So here we see women's issues being discussed, female biology, and being discussed in the Khanqah, and we see the knowledge of hadith as well that Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya has. A couple more. I hope you guys are doing fine. Hope you're enjoying. Feel free to leave at any time. These are all stories about the power of words and the power of music. "20th of January, 1321. Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya said, whenever certain conditions are met, one can listen to sama. And sama is the technical word for things like qawwali. Another type of sama is what the Turkish Sufis do, for instance, the whirling dervishes. These are all types of sama. When dhikr happens, for example, this is a type of sama. Each of these must be right. So he's saying there are conditions for sama. Each of these must be right. The singer, what is sung, the listener, and the musical instrument. He proceeded to elaborate the content of each category. The one summoned to sing must be a man, a mature man. The singer cannot be a boy or a woman. Similarly, what is sung cannot be something lewd or ludicrous. As for the listener, it must be someone who listens to God and is filled with remembrance of Him. And as for the instrument of music, one must not use the harp or lute or viol or other similar instruments. When these conditions have been observed, sama is permissible. Then he added, this is important because the permissibility of music is a constant sort of topic. He said, sama is a voice. Why should rhythm be forbidden? That which is spoken is a word. Why should the comprehension of its meaning be forbidden? Sama is a movement of the heart. If that movement is due to remembering God, it is beneficial. But if the heart is full of corruption, then sama is forbidden. So you see a lot of qawwali these days that is not done very well, right? So a lot of qawwali is become very secularized and despiritualized. So Hazrat Nizam would not be very impressed, masalan, by that kind of qawwali. And these ideas are actually taken, I think, from Imam Ghazali's Ihya ul-Uddeen. So if anyone is interested on the topic of music, they should read the book of music in Ihya ul-Uddeen. It's exactly the same ideas here. But interestingly, Imam Ghazali allows women to sing. He doesn't say that women can't sing, which is an interesting difference. Tamam. On the power of words and spiritual music. How are we going for time? 5 more minutes? Oh dear. Okay. I'll read one story here and 1 or 2 more stories from the next slide. So give me 10 minutes, inshallah. 27th of March 1311. Hazrat Nizam ud-Deen Auliya, like any educated person in his time, loved poetry and loved literature. And he even memorized sections of Maqamat al-Hariri, which is the epitome of Arabic prose literature. And of course he loved Farsi poetry. Saadi, Shirazi comes up in these discourses, and Sanai and so on and so forth. I obtained the good fortune of kissing his feet. He began talking about poetry and prose. From his blessed mouth came this pronouncement: every eloquent turn of phrase that one hears causes delight. But the same thought expressed in prose, when cast into verse, causes still greater delight. A similar judgment applies to chanting. Every phrase that causes delight, if you are able to hear it chanted, how much greater still is your delight. At this point I interjected, is there nothing which touches the heart so deeply as listening to the devotional music sama? For those who tread this path desiring the divine, replied the Master, the taste which is evoked in them through sama resembles a fire set ablaze. If this were not the case, where would one find eternity? And how would one evoke the taste for eternity? As he spoke, the Master's eyes began to fill with tears and he let out a deep sigh. Something really quickly, 26th of September. Conversation turned to the connotations of ghazals and other forms of verse. The Master observed, each individual must grasp the connotations of poems for himself. A poem hits you in a very, very unique and individual way. And then there are stories here of Baba Farid. There was a poem that hit him and he spent days and days and days thinking about the same poem because it affected his heart in such a way. So the right poem at the right time for the right person is a door into eternity. And I've literally had moments in my life where I read a poem and I have to go for a walk to let it sink in. But I could show the same poem to Adil maybe, and he'd be like, oh, that's a weird analogy. But Adil could read a poem that is so profound for him, and it could not have the same effect on me. So there's something deeply actually individual about spirituality that's being said here. 1 or 2 stories from here, inshallah. Importance of pain. Okay, we'll do this one and we'll do heart and nafs, okay? Then we'll finish. Thank you all for your attention, for your focus. 22nd of August, 1314. I had the good fortune of kissing his hand. Conversation focused on forbearance and guarding against anger. There is the lower self, the nafs, and there is the heart, he explained. Whoever gives vent to his lower self must be deflected by one motivated from the heart. That is to say, the lower self is the abode of anger, strife, and discord, while the heart nurtures peace, contentment, and gentleness. Hence, if someone displays the urges of the lower self, the other person must express the feelings of his heart, since the latter will overpower the former. Imagine if a person were to confront another's lower self with his own lower self. What limits would there be to the anger and strife that result? Great marriage advice. Then concerning the benefit of forbearance and compassion, the following verse came to his blessed lips. If like straw by every breeze you are beckoned, so like a straw you go whichever way the wind goes, no mountain are you, less than straw you are reckoned. You're not a mountain, you're not even straw, you're just something pathetic. Yeah. And the last story, inshallah, the importance of pain. Second of June, 1315. In this vein, the Master told a story about Ali Khokhri. Ali Khokhri, it sounds like Khokhar, it's really interesting, lived in Multan. He never trusted someone unless that person had experienced love or pain. There's a great story about it's told in Turkish Tasawwuf, of a young man who comes and he says, "Oh Sheikh, I want to be your disciple." And the Sheikh said, "Have you been in love? Have you had your heart broken?" He says, "No." And the Sheikh says, "Go, fall in love, have your heart broken, come back to me." Even if an individual was pious and devout, Ali Khokhri would say, so-and-so is nothing. He doesn't have tears, ashk. But the correct word never came to his tongue. He would invariably say ashk instead of ishq. So ashk is tear, ishq is love. The Master also recalled the statement of Yahya Ma'az Razi, may God be merciful to him. He used to say, one particle of love is better than all the obedience of humankind. The Master also recalled that Shaykh al-Islam Fariduddin Ganja Shakar, may God sanctify his lofty secret, many times would say to those who came to visit to him, may God Almighty give you pain. May God give you pain. And people would be surprised. What sort of supplication is this? They would ask themselves. Now it is evident, concluded the Master, what he meant by that supplication. 4, and it seems like Sijzi put in this note, for unless you experience the pain of separation from God, you can't experience an intense love for Him. And of course, an intense pain, the separation, it's about compassion and sensitivity and thoughtfulness. And that these are the opposite qualities of arrogance. So these are some stories from Fawaid ul-Fuad. If anyone is interested in reading more, they can of course buy Fawaid ul-Fuad, translated by Bruce Lawrence, Beacon Books. They can also read The Life and Times of Sheikh Nizam ud-Deen Auliya by Khalik Ahmed Nizami. You could find this online. So I read this book to prepare for this lecture. Lots of insight into his life and times and so on and so forth. And there's a great lecture by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, The Life and Legacy of Nizam ud-Deen Auliya, and it's on YouTube. It's a great also insight. So